All right, here we are at the crafting table. And right now what we're going to do is walk through the creation of the base for our tiles in our modular terrain system. These tiles, and ultimately we're going to get to this point, are made with a sturdy foam core center. Gives us a nice strong platform on which we can play with our minis, connect things together with foam core biscuits, so we can build out an interesting diorama. To get there, we're going to cut up some foam core using some templates that are provided with our modular terrain sets. My preference is to use a sheet of 3x3 tiles. Turns out this is the most flexible. We can go and cut out a 3x6 easily or a 6x6 easily, or as I will show you now, we can even attach these together so we can maybe maximize some of the foam core that we're using and get lots of 6x6 inch tiles, even though that don't fit on a single sheet of paper. So the first step is to get some of these printed out, and I've just used regular copy paper. You want to make sure that when you do any printing for these modular terrain pieces, or in paper crafting in general, that you're not scaling the prints. Sometimes your PDF reader, when you go to print, there'll be an option to shrink things down so that the pages fit within the margins of the printer. We want to make sure we print to the actual size so that 3 inches really is 3 inches. Otherwise, things aren't going to connect well together. My tools here today are, I've got a snap blade craft knife. I have a cork-backed metal ruler. And to attach this to the foam core, which I have a piece over there, I'm going to either be using some inexpensive glue sticks, or I like to use spray glue, like Super 77 spray glue, because this goes on very quickly and evenly and doesn't have a lot of water in it that's going to warp things. Not great to be inhaling a lot of this, so I want to make sure that it's being used in a well-ventilated area. So I'm not going to be spraying it on my workspace here. I typically bring it into a special area that I've got set up where I can use that and not worry about inhaling all of the spray that gets kicked up. You can also use a repositionable spray mount for the tile templates. It's not that important that the copy paper stay on the foam core forever. But in general, I don't use the spray mount for much more. As we get into some of the other pieces, the spray glue, the Super 77, is great for walls or large pieces that need to stay flat. The spray mount, like I said, is repositionable, so that glue is not going to stay forever. Okay, let's get started by taking my template here and trimming around the edges. There is a little bit of a margin around the tiles. That just makes it easier to trim the foam core down once it's been glued in place. And I'm going to show the little trick of getting more 6-inch tiles out of this work, because that's the kind of tile that I find I need the most. I like to make larger multi-story builds, and to do that, I'm going to need a fair amount of tiles to stack on top of each other. So I like to have a good amount of 6-inch tiles. So after I've trimmed this down, I'm going to do the same with the other sheet. What I want to do is on one end, I'm going to get rid of that extra margin and I'm going to trim it right up against the tile right here. So I'm just going to tape these together, and that's going to give me a nice long template to work with. All right, so let's see what we've got going here. So we can take this first template, and I'm just going to line up this second one with the first. And this is totally optional. I've got some boards I've already done up here. Let's see, I've got some that I've already trimmed down to size, but I like to do these well in advance. And you can see I even have some where I've done just this one sheet. And that's fine. I'll get a hallway out of that, or maybe I'll get a couple of 3x3 inch tiles out of that. But here I'm going to do something slightly longer, and I'm going to grab a little bit of tape. Stick these together, and now this is ready. Spray the back of this with some spray glue, mount it directly to some foam core, and we can get to cutting out. All right, so I've done that here. You can see I've got it taped together. This is a far from perfect piece of foam core, but it'll do just fine for our tiles. You're not going to see any of these blemishes once I'm done, but I like to use every ounce of foam core that I can. So to get these tiles trimmed out, I'm going to first use my knife to crudely cut this page apart from the larger piece of foam core, just to make it easier to work with. And just making sure I'm cutting on my cutting mat. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to take a 6-inch piece off of this, and that will be my first kind of, it's like the bones of the tile. This is making kind of a skeleton here. You'll notice as I'm cutting the foam core, I tend to make 2 or 3 passes across the foam core. Usually the first cut is to just break the paper on the top surface. The second cut will cut through the foam layer, and then the third cut will cut through the lower layer of paper. Sure, you can use brute force and get through all 3 layers at once, but I'm going to be honest, it gets a little tiring on your hands to be cutting a lot of foam core, and I like to do less work by making more cuts. So 1, 2, and the third cut comes off nice and easy. Now, there's a couple of special tricks to cutting nice, clean tile bases. One is on these outer edges of the tile, I like to line my ruler up so it's just inside the lines. If I'm going to be cutting this shape, the texture that goes around it is going to be 6 inches by 6 inches. So I need this to be ever so slightly smaller than that so that the paper can wrap around it just fine. So if I'm going to err on one side or the other, I'm going to try and err on the side of being inside of the lines here. Not too far, not even a millimeter, but just enough to get rid of the printed ink. The second piece of advice is to cut at a slight angle. It's really hard to get your blade perfectly vertical, so it's a 90-degree angle. But if you tilt it just a little bit in towards the tile as you're cutting, it'll be very hard to see on the camera, but the bottom side is actually a little bit inset from the top, so that when the 2 tiles press against each other, the top surfaces will be nice and snug up against each other. There may be a little gap on the back side, but you're never going to see it, so that's great. If it was the other way around and the bottom was pressed up against each other snug, then you'll see a little gap on the top surface, and that's not going to look as great when you get your builds done. So you can repeat this process, get all of your basic tiles cut out. I like to have a bunch of these 6-inch ones ready to go. I have a whole stack of them so that when I find myself in need of a little extra terrain, I can either turn this into a 3x6 or a 3x3 tile if I need to, or I'll just have my 6x6 ready to go. The next thing I need to do is to cut out each one of these notches around the edge. Not in the middle here, but around the edges. That's going to allow me to have a spot to slide these biscuits in. It's kind of like in woodworking where you need to join multiple pieces together. And those will slide right into that slot and then connect to the other tile. So the way I go about that, and I don't even need my ruler for this, I'm just going to, using my multi-pass strategy, I'm going to cut these straight lines. And just to speed up the process, what I like to do is do all of the lines that are going in one direction, so I'm not adjusting the knife constantly in my hand. So now that I've done those, I can go and do these vertical lines. Let's go and do the sides here. Now, unlike the outer edges of the tile where I said I want to cut on the inside of the lines, here I'm cutting ever so slightly on the outside of the lines. If this notch that I cut out is too narrow, then this won't fit. It turns out before we go and finish the tile by wrapping it in texture, we can make some minor adjustments to that, so we can make sure everything's going to work fine. And so I'm going to just work my way around the tile. As I'm cutting these vertical lines here, I'm not struggling to get all the way up into that corner there, because I'm going to make one final pass in the other direction and everything's just going to pop out. Be very satisfying. And so we're almost done with prepping this tile. So when you're in the mode of crafting a particular piece, I would say the tiles take the longest to build and assemble. So it's nice to have some of these blanks ready to go. All right, so now that I've cut all the way around, I'm going to finish by going on the other side and popping into this corner that isn't cut. And that just pops right out. Do that for each corner. And before I finish this, let me just flip this upside down. And you can even take a look and see where the spots are that haven't been cut yet. So if you're struggling, you think you've got everything and it's still not popping out, just flip it upside down and you can poke the knife right in there and you can take it out as well. Easy peasy. So that's really all there is to it, to building up your modular terrain. Next step, we're going to do another video, is actually wrapping these things with textures and getting the tabs in place so that we can start worrying about the walls.